Now, the next part of the Rogerian therapeutic practice, yes, yes?
What's the difference between genuine criticism of someone, or genuinely giving your perspective, or just arguing a point about it?
Well, that's a good question. Let's see if we can formulate that. So, the first difference might be, well, what's the outcome we're looking for? Like, let's think about that. Let's think about that in the context of an intimate relationship, a familial relationship. So you have a wife, let's say, and you've got some kids. What are you up to? What do you want?
Hopefully trying to make things better.
Okay, so that's one thing. We're trying to establish the domain of the argument. We're going to try to make things better. What would better look like, do you think?
Don't know. In the short term, I usually try to eliminate whatever negative emotion I'm feeling.
Okay, so there's something, okay, so that's a Rogerian presupposition, is that part of what you're doing when you're making things better is to decrease the probability that negative emotion will arise. Short term or long term?
Short term first. That's what's bothering me.
Ah, okay, so that's an interesting thing, because what if you have to experience a tremendous amount of short-term pain in order to make long-term progress?
If it's different from the pain that initially got me thinking about it, that seems like an improvement, potentially.
Okay.
Going somewhere.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm going to address your question completely from a Piagetian perspective, but that's okay, because it works for Rogers as well. It's just easier to explain. Freedom from unnecessary suffering in the short, medium, and long term across as many people as you can manage. So we'll say you can start with you and your family. Okay, how are you going to do that? You don't know. That's what you have to talk about. But you can't have that conversation until you've got that framework, right? So, and it's very, very tricky, because in the midst of the argument, there's going to be tremendous temptation to oppress and deceive and humiliate and treat with contempt and hurt and punish and threaten, all of those things, right? And that's partly reactivity in the short term. And then that's not properly integrated into the overarching hierarchical structure. So you've got to keep bringing yourself back to that. It's like, well, why should you control your impulses? Well, because they're manifestation in the present, they're spontaneous and impulsive manifestation in the present. Well, although that may be it may carry with it a feeling of freedom and power, maybe destroying the very structure that's going to provide you with peace and stability over the medium and long run. So it's the idea of contradiction. Now, if we're having a discussion, okay, so let's say, we'll do this in a very local fashion. It's like, well, let's say you're having a discussion with your partner about who's going to cook dinner. Okay, so you think that's a simple discussion. It's like, it's not a simple discussion. It's a horrible discussion. It's where the war between the genders manifests itself. It's one of the places. And to solve it, weirdly enough, you actually have to solve the war between the genders. Well, good luck with that. And there it is right in your house, right? It's like a snake in a garden. There's no getting rid of it. Okay, so then you might think, well, what's our aim for dinner? Well, do we want to have wretched, miserable, rotten food served by a resentful person to a bunch of ungrateful rats who complain and snivel? It's like, no, let's assume we don't want that. Okay, good. Well, we know what we're not aiming at. It's like, all right, who should cook dinner and when, and what are the rules by which we decide that? Huh, that's a tough one. Because you can return to roles, right? That's why people have roles, so they don't have to have stupid conversations like this, but that time is gone. Okay, so what do you do when there's no role? Well, I could make you do it, maybe. You know, I could either do it physically, by force, or I could just intimidate you, or I could make life miserable for you if you don't do it, or, you know, there's lots of ways of using power. Problem with that is, you're not without your own weapons. And for every step I take towards making you miserable, you'll get your chance. So probably we don't want to use force. Plus, that's not so good for the kids, you know, as, from a role model perspective, and hypothetically we want good things to be happening to them. So tyranny looks like it's out, and I don't want you to subjugate yourself because maybe you're very agreeable, let's say that, because that's often a problem in communication between men and women. The guy's more disagreeable than the woman is, and so if he like jacks up the level of conflict, she'll back off because she doesn't like conflict for all sorts of different reasons. So that's another way of winning, except then the person who loses is all resentful and you end up with, you know, horrible, miserable food fed to warring partners who are complaining and struggling. It's not a good solution. All right, so then what are you left with? Well, then you've got negotiation. Okay, so I might say, well, do we agree that we need to have dinner? Well, you know, you might think, okay, well, we could agree on that. How often should we have it at home? Well, that's going to require a fair bit of thought. You want to go out now and then? How often? How much is that going to cost? What are we going to spend? Where are we going to go? Okay, who pays? Okay, so that's going to be like a whole conversation. So let's say we figure that out and it's like 5 days a week we're going to stay home. Okay, who's going to cook? Well, do you like cooking? Do I like cooking? That's something to sort out. So that would be, that's like a little discussion with your own physiology in some sense. You know, what's your felt state while you're preparing the food? And maybe you'll say, well, I like it, I'll cook if there's someone in the kitchen with me and, you know, someone else cleans up afterwards. Then it turns out that I don't mind cooking. Well, and then you might say, well, is not minding good enough, or do you really want to enjoy it? It's like, what's the preconditions? What preconditions would have to be met for you to enjoy it? Well, you want to think about that, because if you can get the person, either of you, who the hell cares, to enjoy it, then it's sort of self-sustaining, right? You put that into place, and then the thing runs smoothly across multiple iterations. And so then you might think, well, what are the preconditions for us to do that in a way that would be joyful, let's say? Okay, well, that's a high bar. It's like, well, one or the other of us should learn to cook, because otherwise we're going to be eating like, you know, canned spaghetti or some other sort of horror. And that's not very high quality, so that problem might have to be solved. And then there's the problem of how you react to the person when they cook. You know, like, do you just assume that that's their bloody responsibility, and if they don't live up to it, there's something wrong with them? Or do you notice what they're doing and express some appreciation and gratitude and in a way that would increase the probability that it would happen again? That would be a better solution. So then you have to negotiate about how you're going to do that exactly. Maybe even right down to the level of words. But what you're trying to serve a higher order by doing that, right? You're trying to satisfy basic organismal needs, the provision of food. But I mean, food's complicated for human beings, because you just don't pour dog food in the bowl and, you know, chow down. Even dogs won't do that. Our dog won't eat unless we're eating. You know, so human beings are extremely social eaters. So you have to get that right. And so, but the conversation will only take place in the proper manner if your orientation is proper during the conversation. And the orientation needs to be, how can we make this better for both of us in the long run and for the people around us? And that you have to bow down before that in some sense as the highest order principle that you're serving. And then you can stumble around trying to work that out. And then you might say, well, you cook 3 times a week and I cook twice and I'll take you out once. And then of course you have to get the whole grocery thing settled out, and that's a whole other bloody complicated conversation, but it needs to be done. And then you might say, well, let's run this for a couple of weeks and we'll see how it goes, and then we can meet again and we can discuss what worked and what didn't. And the goal is to make it better, make it better, make it better, make it better. And then no one's trying to win. Well, it depends on what you mean by win. I'm not trying to defeat you. Why? Well, I have to live with you. That'd be the first reason. It's like, what the hell good is it defeating you unless I want someone wandering around like this, you know, resentful and bitter. Maybe I do want that. But I don't think that's a very good place to start. So, when you have a client come in to see you, the rule is, I can tell you the rules I use because they're Rogerian. I will tell the person what I think. So, I won't tell them that what I think is right. But if they're doing something and I have a reaction to that of some sort, that'll usually express itself in a fantasy or a thought, and I'll just tell them what happened. And I try to do it as gently as I possibly can, because you can use the truth as a club, but then that's not the truth. And then at least they get the honest response of one person to what they're like. And I'll tell you, I've seen lots of people who've never got the honest response of any one person ever in their whole life to what they're like. And so they have no idea what they're like, or what's annoying other people, or how they should behave, or any of those things. So even though I'm not going to be right, in that my reactions won't be a precisely accurate representation of the average response of other people, which is basically what you're trying to model, it's going to be a lot better than they've had so far. And then the other precondition is, you're going to try really hard to get yourself together, whatever that means. We're going to talk about whatever that means, and I'm going to support you in that. And that's our goal. And that's a variant of Rogerian unconditional positive regard. And his unconditional positive regard, in some sense, was the setup for the therapy. So the presupposition is you're valuable, although maybe you're a little on the bent and twisted side, but maybe you could be straightened up into something that's like deadly. And we're going to start with that presupposition, and we're going to learn on the way. But that's what we're aimed at. So the unconditional positive regard, it's like a human rights thing, eh? Because the basis of the idea of human rights is that people are valuable. They have some intrinsic value. And I think maybe it's reasonable to presuppose that from the Rogerian perspective is that what's valuable about you is your being, right? You're a locus of experience. And as such, you're a unique locus of experience. And as such, you have something to contribute that no one else can contribute. And that's valuable. It's intrinsically valuable. That's the basic presupposition of the idea of human rights, by the way. So if that's acted out in the therapeutic session, but it's acted out in any relationship that's therapeutic.